Hi everybody, it's Ruth Royal here from Youth Pledge for Employers, and today we're happy to be talking to Thomas Panton from Greenr.co.uk. Thomas, nice to see you.
Hello. Hi Ruth, lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, great. So the first thing I'd like is if you could just tell us a bit about your new business, Greenr.co.uk.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. So I think we're all very aware of, what's happening with the climate and the changes that we need to make as individuals and as businesses and governments. But one thing that I've always been incredibly a strong believer of and incredibly passionate about is that individuals shouldn't have to change their lives drastically to be able to be a better impact, sort of live a better impact lifestyle. So Greenr.co.uk's premise is that we are tapping into people's habits of shopping, so allowing them to shop when they want, how they want, for what they want, but in a place where all of those products have been vetted and quantified for having a better impact on the planet and on people. So it makes it much easier to purchase with a purpose, but also much easier to continue sort of enjoying to buy new things when you want or need them, right? But just having a better impact doing that.
That is really interesting about the concept for Greenr.co.uk. I wonder if there are young people thinking about starting their own business. Where do you start? Like right from that point of how do you get a good idea? How do you know it's a good idea? And then how do you actually do something with that?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult and not difficult question. So I'll start with the latter. So I think that if you're passionate about something and you've got a value, a certain set of values or ethics, or you really believe that something needs to change for the better, or for just making things more accessible, or whatever it might be, then actually it's not hard to come up with ideas and things that you think might be might actually better the world or better individuals' sort of way of living, whether that's in sustainability or not, right? It can be anything. However, the difficulty comes with, do other people want that? It's very easy for particularly young entrepreneurs and young founders like myself to really get super passionate about what we're building and the solution that we've come up with, or the idea that we've come up with, and sort of forget that other people are going to be using that, and that's what a business is. It's great to have an idea, but it's not a solution if it's not adoptable. That's where I always go with this. And so I think the best thing that you can do as a young person wanting to go into business or to freelance or whatever it might be, where you're sort of controlling your own workload, or what you're offering to people, is talk to people, communicate, go and ask questions, as early as you can, preferably. One thing that I think we get quite nervous of is if we ask questions and tell people about our idea or our solution, is that it will be sort of stolen, and then we've lost it forever. But to be honest, if that happens, then you weren't the person to do it in the first place, most likely. But also it's more work for someone to go and get the passion that you've got for your idea than to sort of support you, who's already got that passion, to go and do it. So what we found, particularly me, is that when I ask people or speak to people about what we're doing, and have asked for advice over the years of having this business and the business before, is that actually everyone's willing to give some insight. You don't always have to take it, but I think that's where to start, is just go and talk to people, see if other people think it's a good idea, and then you can start to sort of test that on people, and whether that's with questionnaires or just literally having a conversation.
That's really helpful. So I was just making myself some notes there. So essentially we're almost sort of like feel, passion. What do you feel is like really important to you? Think about what you think is a good idea, talk to other people to make sure other people can believe in it too, and then decide kind of your next steps forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then how do you go about, what sort of things do you do to get funding?
Big question. So I think that there are so many fantastic routes to get funding. But one thing I would say is none of them are get money quick or get rich quick schemes or anything like that. So it's hard work. And one thing I would say to most people is that if you can do it without money, which is such a rubbish thing to say, but if you can sort of get it off the ground without capital and without money, you're in a much stronger position, because then if you don't come from a financially wealthy background, or you can't go and ask whoever in your family or friends for that money, or get a loan for whatever reason, for financial reasons, at least then you can still start getting that idea going. And that's why I think talking, back to my first point, is really important, because even if you just mocked some sort of idea of that product or platform out, or put together just 3 bullet points of what those ideas are, you can start getting the business up and off the ground without funding. To answer your question directly, though, and not be a politician about it, there are lots of ways, and you've got to choose which way is best for your business. So, whether it is debt financing, so taking a loan and knowing that you've got the security either in sort of savings or in a job that you're going to keep going whilst you've got that loan until the business becomes profitable, whatever, that can be a really good way, because then you own the business. We've taken a different route, which is equity funding. So we essentially sell parts of our business to people who love what we're doing and want to support that, but also want to own some of that growth. So, if we're random numbers, if you want to raise £1 million and if you want to raise £100,000 and you have a value of £1 million, then you're giving 10% of your company away. So then you'll only own 90% over that. So it's a hard decision to make, because I think for a lot of people, they want to hold on to their baby, right? And I'd really encourage that for a lot of people, because a lot of businesses don't need that sort of funding. But if you're a type of business like Greenr.co.uk, which has the potential to scale and impact millions, if not billions, of people's lives around the world, then that growth sort of energy from your investors can be really positive and really helpful. I think the other thing that most people will ask you if you go for equity financing is, how much money have you put in yourself? Which, again, I don't really like the question, because it assumes you've got money to put in, which we certainly didn't. However, if you do, or if you can, it's a really good way to do it, right? Because you're the one putting up the risk, and you're the one who can grow the business. But again, I really empathize with founders like myself who couldn't put money up, from their savings account, because that might not exist, and then sort of going down different routes and different options.
That was really helpful, and I don't think I've ever heard anybody explain it that clearly. That was really, really useful, Thomas. Thank you. Sort of reflecting now on yourself and your own journey into sort of entrepreneurship, how did you sort of end up at this point?
A really, really windy road. I was definitely not going to go into any further academic or business or anything as a teenager going through my GCSEs and A-levels, because I was a swimmer, a sports person, and that was my passion and focus, and I was aiming for the 2016 Olympics, and I didn't see that not being my life, so I just completely focused on that until I became injured through my sports, and also experienced some sort of toxic environment from sort of young sportsmanship, and that I think a lot of people will resonate with that, especially as young people in lots of different sports. And I think at that point I had to really reevaluate what I do, right? Because suddenly I'm not going to be a swimmer, I'm not going to be sponsored, that's not going to be my lifestyle. So what am I doing? So then I did decide to go to university, which was a run my finger down a list and pick one, because I had absolutely not thought about it before then, and definitely hadn't put the effort into my A-levels that I absolutely should have if I wanted to go to university. So I was somewhat limited. And then went to university and got involved with Greenpeace. I was already passionate about the environment. Worked with Greenpeace for 4.5 years, doing a mixture of stuff from fundraising to activism to outreach and campaigns management, and really, really enjoyed it, and really sort of understood the scale of the climate crisis, but also understood the frustration from individuals at the lack of accessibility to solve those problems, right? So individuals just don't know how to do it, and it's often just seems like this massive issue which we just can't touch. So out of that, I set up my first company. I saw a problem, I went to events lots, both with Greenpeace and in a band, and I mean, if anyone's listening to this and has been to a festival, you'll know that there are hundreds of thousands of tents left over at festivals every year in the UK. So my first company was, we have to solve that, so I'm going to solve it. I hadn't really put much thought into it, which is why, again, I would always recommend going and speaking to people. But yeah, and it we were the first company to be contracted by festivals to collect leftover festival tents at scale. So previously, and currently actually, only about 1 to 2% of leftover festival tents get collected. We collected over 85% of leftover festival tents, and that was really successful. First time company doing it, and then the pandemic came. So there were absolutely no festivals and no events, and I didn't want to hedge all my bets on waiting until they come back. So then I got into Greenr, and I think that once you have tasted being a founder or in entrepreneurship, you will go one of two ways. Either you will absolutely hate it, and the pressure will just break you, and you'll be like, absolutely not, I'm never doing this again. I've seen founders who are like that, and I respect them, because I think that it's a hard decision to make, to drop something you love, but because it's better for your health. Or you get the bug. And I've definitely ended up with that. So, I have never ending ideas, and often just need to buckle down and focus on one, which is what I'm doing right now. So.
That is so interesting to hear your journey, Thomas. Thanks for sharing that with us. I think it's really it's been really interesting to talk to businesses, because so often you hear about how adversity, actually, though it's incredibly difficult at the time, how actually that often promotes creativity. Really having to think in different ways to be able to move things forward.
Absolutely.
Thinking about entrepreneurs, what if you were to sort of, I hate sort of pigeonholing people, but if you were to think of like the top 3 personal qualities or attributes or characteristics that you've noticed around sort of, maybe in yourself,
Yeah.
or in, sort of other founders, what sort of things do you think they are?
I think it depends on what type of entrepreneur you are. You might be sort of the visionary founder compared to like the numbers founder, right? You're going to have very different attributes. But I think that 3 big sort of top level things that you'll find in most people is that they often don't work well with conformity. They struggle with the traditional route of education, traditional route of work, struggle to be told what to do quite a lot of time. And it's not to say that they're super rebellious, but that their brain doesn't work in that way. So you call it neurodivergency or whatever you want to call it, but I think that it's just a different way of learning and a different way of working. And pretty much every single successful founder I know has that trait in some way, along some spectrum somewhere. And then I think that you need to be absolutely ambitious and pretty confident in that ambition. So, you obviously have to have a goal. You obviously want to hit that goal. That goal will be pretty big. It's important to know that you won't hit that goal straight away, but definitely keep that vision, because otherwise you're not driving your business forward. And I think the third thing is to learn and listen as well, which sort of contradicts that second one a little bit. But I think that you'll find 2 different types of founders. Ones which are so bullish in their own ideas that they are either very successful, rarely though, or they just flop because they haven't listened to people who have been there, done that, or they, haven't been able to sort of take on advice, even if it's a little bit hard sometimes. And I think the ones that listen and learn often will be more successful, or at least will learn from it and then go on to do something more successfully. It's not an easy thing to do, and particularly for myself, swimming is a solo sport predominantly. I set up my first company as a solo founder, and in this company I've got 2 other co-founders, and also a bunch of advisors. And I think that the biggest learning curve, but also the most sort of successful learning curve, has been to be able to sit back on your own idea, listen a bit, and then digest it and learn from it. You don't always have to take that advice, but it can really help.
Oh, that was really interesting to hear. Really, really interesting to sort of hear about those 3 traits from your perspective. And probably my final question, Thomas, is if you were to go back and have a conversation with your younger self, what would you say to yourself? What piece of advice would you give yourself in terms of careers?
I'm going to be cheeky and give sort of 2 answers here.
Go for it.
I think the first piece of advice I'd give is you don't have to do what everyone tells you to do. The British education system, but just generally the Western education system, loves telling you that the path is, you do your SATs if they still exist, your GCSEs, your A levels, and then you go to university, and then you either go and work in a corporate job and work your way up, or you do a master's and then do a corporate job and work your way up, or you go into PhD and then you become a lecturer or a researcher, and that's it. That's all you can do. It's just so outdated, and I think that most people are too young, and also their parents probably don't know that there's lots of other options out there, so therefore you're just sort of pushed into that. And it doesn't have to be an education. You know, if you go out of education into apprenticeship, you end up going down the route of, okay, I go and do an apprenticeship, let's use being a builder, for example, and then you'll become a builder and you work for a builder's firm, and then you'll either go and eventually set up your own builder's firm, or generally that's sort of your route. And I think that is admirable if you want to go and do it that way. Like, some people, that works really well for them. But for me personally, I would go back to myself and I'd say, look, if you don't feel that's right, go and have a look at what else is out there, and maybe, be a bit more ambitious with what you want to do, and kind of stray outside of those lines, and challenge people a little bit. I mean, the other bit of advice though I'd give is, don't be so arrogant. So I think that it's very good having confidence, and it's also really good challenging authority and challenging sort of what the status quo is, if you don't necessarily agree with it, up to a point. If you're challenging status quo when that status quo is backed by science, don't do that. But I think that comes with a caveat, which is you can be confident without being arrogant. And I think that as a swimmer, as a young swimmer in a competitive landscape from the age of 8 or 9 up until 18, I didn't learn that, and just learned how to compete, and therefore would sort of walk around with a theoretical golden crown on my head. And I think that is there's aspects of that you need as an entrepreneur. There's aspects of that you need as a sports person, or as someone who's really passionate and driven. But there are definitely aspects which can really hinder you, and also negatively affect your own mental health as well. So I think that, just take a step back sometimes. And my dad would love this, because he was always telling me this as a kid, and I always hated it. Whereas now I'm like, 10 years later, telling myself as a kid not to do it. And I'm sure I'll have the same thing with my kids, and onwards and onwards. But those are the two pieces I'd give.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. It's been absolutely brilliant to meet you. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Thanks so much,
Thomas.
Cheers.